Covering the final day of the federal election campaign. In the days ahead of Election Day, the focus was clear for all the leaders. Drill down on the closing arguments and message. Take a listen to them doing just that.
In a crisis, we must first distinguish between what we can change and what we can't. We can't change President Trump, so we need a leader that can stand up to him. My question to Canadians is simple. Is Pierre Poilievre the person you want sitting across the table from Donald Trump negotiating for us?
We cannot trust Mark Carney by giving the Liberals a fourth term to boost your cost of living and the crime in your streets. We cannot trust anything he says. In fact, we know that he has plagiarized Justin Trudeau's platform. We now know the Liberals wrote the platform for Trudeau, and Mark Carney simply replaced Trudeau's name with his own.
You got the power now in this election. You got the power to send us to Ottawa. We're going to hold the line on the things that matter most to Canadians. We're going to fight to keep Canada, Canada. We're going to fight back against the cuts. We're going to stand up and say Canada has to work for the people who work in this country, who build this country.
Here to break down how those messages are landing and what we should expect to unfold tomorrow is our Sunday strategy session. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Good to see you on this Sunday. We obviously have a lot of strategy to discuss, but I did want to start off with sort of the most horrifying of things that we've been covering already, Scott. This day normally for a campaign involves like tons of rallies, tons of stops, and all three parties had a schedule that essentially entailed that, and now all three appear to be augmenting them kind of on the go. Your comment on sort of what has unfolded and its impact today.
Yeah, well, obviously, the loss of life, the tragedy that's occurred, seizes the country, seizes voters, and it seizes hold of campaigns as they're forced to re-engineer their day and find the right balance. You know, people still want to campaign on this final opportunity, but the priority must be placed on expressing concern, expressing condolence with those who have been affected. And so you see campaigns on the fly asking themselves, would it be appropriate to hold a rally today? Does that feel like it's tone deaf? Certainly, if I'm going to be in British Columbia, what should I be doing? What's the balance between politics and campaigning versus reaching out to the community and making certain that people see that brand of leadership, not just asking for votes, but rather sharing concerns and condolences. So all of this is happening. It's a question of tone, it's a question of logistics, and it's a big challenge for campaigns to have this happen on the last day. But of course, that pales in comparison to the tragedy that the families and community are feeling.
Yeah, the leaders all seem to really, acknowledge that in their comments so far. Corey, everybody has made them. Everyone has said, like, there's been no political statement basically attached to what they're saying, and they all have, I think, seized on the tone that they should be delivering with.
Yeah, I think I would make the statements that have been made, and I would move on. I don't think it'd be appropriate to hold a rally in Vancouver, but I would hold a rally someplace else if it were me. Yep. Like, if this was a 9/11 type event, where there's a terrorism at the core of it, or we saw a similar attack to this in New Orleans over the New Year's. But it was an act of terrorism. This, on all accounts, is not something like that. So I think it ends up being, something of which there is less to say. I guess we'll find out more over the coming while what the motivation was. But if it isn't actually touching on something, larger, then it's a terrible tragedy, yes, but it's one at which I think the campaigns will move on more quickly than if it had been an act of terrorism. So I think the most important thing is to go out there, land your ballot question one last time in as many message events in as many key places as possible. And I think, minus the adjustments that we've seen, I think everyone's going to move on with their day and get on with that task.
Yeah, everyone has adjusted. I should be clear. They're the first part of their day, either delaying events, Kathleen, to deliver those statements, or in some cases, the NDP has augmented more of their schedule, and the type of events being held, I think, with the other two parties have been augmented as well.
Yeah, as CTV has reported, Jagmeet Singh and the tour were actually at the event last night, just left moments before the attack happened. Singh and the NDPs commented last night and are recasting most of their events today. It is a difficult day because all of the campaigns had multiple events, whistle-stop tours, campaigns, rallies. So those will be changed, recalibrated in light of the tragedy. But what's interesting about these events, or can be, is as how they ricochet through the campaign. The example that Scott, I'm sure, and Corey remember was late in the evening or early in the morning of May 2nd in 2011, Osama bin Laden was assassinated finally by the Americans just before that election in 2011. And I remember thinking the night before, going, how does this impact this last day of the campaign on election day? So also part of the team is thinking through that, thinking how they can support Canadians, how they can support the community specifically that have been affected by the tragedy.
So I'll make a pivot now, if we could talk more largely about the campaign. And I was hoping that each of you could evaluate your own party's campaign strategy, particularly in these closing 10 days, 2 weeks in particular, Scott. They definitely had Trump on their side at the outset. They focused the campaign very early, but it feels very tight at this moment in time, and public opinion polls are definitely reflecting that.
Yeah, it's tight. It's tight as a tiger, and people are just waiting to see who gets clawed. Look, close and closing tells you that the Liberals have seen their lead squeezed, and so that means, in particular, in British Columbia, in particular, in Ontario, in the Golden Horseshoe, where there's so many seats up for grabs, 905 all the way down to Niagara. It means that they're going to have to fight for every single scrap. I think the Liberals are still in the strongest position. It seems to me that what has saved them is Mark Carney. It is an emphasis on leader. And what's interesting is, even as we see this ballot question being fought out, take on Trump versus time for a change, one of the saving graces in these past few days, as we watch the Liberals struggle to maintain the frame and get over the finish line, is that Mark Carney scores better on those issues of managing the economy, cost of living. He scores better, relatively speaking, than Pierre Poilievre does when it comes to Trump. And so even if the campaign is tilted slightly toward a ballot question he does and the Liberals do not like, Mark Carney still has enough strength there that it looks like they will pull out the most number of seats and still, I think, probably, knock on wood, pull out a majority.
Corey, the first, middle part of the campaign, I guess, was punctuated by some comments of yours criticizing the Conservative campaign that made a lot of news. They have drilled down very concretely on a message around change, again, particularly over the last 10 days, that appears to have at least narrowed the gap between the two parties. What are your thoughts on their strategy this last little while?
Well, I think there's been a second attempt to pivot in the closing of this campaign, which has been to pull Pierre Poilievre from their advertising. To build upon what Scott just mentioned, when you look at the leadership scores of the two main candidates relative to one another, Poilievre continues to be a significant ballot drag on the Conservative Party, whereas Carney runs ahead of his party. So I think the two things the Conservatives have done to try to adjust for that is, one, to move more to a message focused on don't reelect these guys for 4 more years, something that's more focused on the party and the party brand, and to pull their leader out of the equation, because that comparison is not one that works for them. So those are very tough decisions to make. Very tough decision to decide to put your former leader in your advertising as opposed to your current leader. But this is a time in the campaign where, if you're not winning, you've got to do everything possible, even things that look a bit desperate, to try to save it.
Kathleen, I've been thinking over the past few days about how, maybe separate from other elections that I can remember, the messages from each of the parties are very distinguishable, from very clear and very distinguishable, right? It's navigate Trump versus change. And in the case of the NDP, a slow kind of pivot throughout the campaign that also became punctuated over the last 10 days, which is, we won't win, but you should vote for us to hold whoever is forming government to account. How successful do you think that strategy has been for them?
Well, I think the New Democrats at least were more successful than the Conservatives in knowing that they needed to pivot early, that the issue set in this campaign was going to be Trump and tariffs and more global things. And that's not an issue set that normally New Democrats can win an election on. And so they pivoted quickly to this idea that voting for New Democrats actually holds the programs, healthcare, dental care, pharmacare, houses for families, not for corporate landlords early. And they did that, and they ran a campaign that's largely been, without own goals, without flaws. They have all their candidates. Their policy platform didn't hurt them, but they haven't had the attention that the other parties have had. They haven't broken through, with the exception of the debate nights where Singh had a good performance. They haven't been able to people to watch any of the NDP campaign. And that's been a real challenge. And I think that the pivot, at least earlier than you've seen the pivot the Conservatives did, I think will help them actually maintain some of their seats going into Election Day tomorrow. But it's not been easy. But I think if you look at the campaign and the performance of the leader in particular, he has done well. The problem is just Canadians weren't paying attention in what has become a very polarized two-party race.
Corey, you look like you want to weigh in.
Well, if the campaign went much better for the NDP, I don't know, they'd have 0 seats. Like it's, I think it's true. This is being polarizing. I think the NDP have been squeezed out. I think the Bloc, to a certain extent, have been squeezed out. But Singh's performance, not good. Like as exemplified by where they're sitting in the polls, it's very unlikely he's going to win his seat. It's very unlikely the NDP will have party status. So I have trouble imagining a worse outcome.
I just have like a minute left.
Well,
I want to get Kathleen, I'll give you 30 seconds, and then I want to finish with Scott asking about the other two leaders' futures. Go for it, Kathleen.
Well, I just say, look at the Conservatives, who had a 25-point lead. And if you look through the campaign and you timestamp it, they could not figure out their slogan throughout the entire campaign. It started with, policy slogans, moved to kind of Canada first, then moved to a maple leaf, and then finally landed on the message that we said months ago, change was the most effective message for them. And why they have failed most and get the D in this campaign is precisely because of the fact that they had the money, millions and millions, tens of millions more than any other party, a polling lead that was exceedingly strong, and yet their platform was basically non-existent. They had candidates that hurt them time and time again, and they had a leader that you said, Corey, had to be pulled from their own ads.
Yeah.
I mean,
hard to disagree with any of that. I'm sorry to say, but it's not a great campaign for either of our parties, unfortunately.
I mean, the outcome hasn't been written yet. Just keep in mind, everybody who is watching, and all three of our panelists will be with me live on set tomorrow. Be with myself and Omar Sachedina tomorrow for the outcome of that. Scott, last word to you. If Poilievre loses, if Carney loses, do you think their futures are certain?
No, I don't think they're certain. I don't think they're certainly cooked either. I don't think that Mark Carney is going anywhere as Liberal leader, period. And remember, he inherited a party that was 26 points behind in the poll. He had to, at one part of his mind, been thinking this is a reclamation and a rebuild project. He's managed, astonishingly, to turn it into a re-election campaign. And as for Pierre Poilievre, if he loses, I think he's going to be a difficult leader to dislodge. It's hard to imagine Pierre Poilievre without politics. If he lacks the ambition to be prime minister, what is left of Pierre Poilievre? What does that guy do? It's like a carpenter without a hammer. Strikes me as very odd. So I think he will fight to hang on, and I think he'll be very hard to beat in that fight.
Yeah, well, I think particularly if they get some record level of popular support, even if it doesn't clinch the election for them, that's going to be a different battle, I should say, than the last couple of leaders. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.